I reached my hand inside the tent and felt a cold hand reaching back. Oh, hi there, boys and ghouls. Are you ready for a scary story? My name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back to Here She Lies, a fact or fiction horror podcast that will have you questioning everything you once held dear. Each week, we'll dive into another heart-stopping tale of terror. Some of them are true, and others are just big fat fibs. It's up to you guys to decide which is which. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're tuning in via your favourite podcast app, then don't forget to leave a big, juicy 5-star review. Remember, make sure to have your say either in the comments box below or over on our Instagram page at heresheliespodcast. But before you grab your snacks and position yourself behind the sofa, I'll reveal the answer to our last episode, which I know, was about 1,000,000 years ago, so let me give you a wee refresher. Scared Silly told the story of a young nurse from Jacksonville, Florida, who took to the internet to share her own bizarre encounter with a killer clown. The mysterious figure stalks her all the way to her front door, but then vanishes just as quickly as he appeared. Initially, she chalked the whole thing up to nothing but a childish prank. However, the next day, she provided a startling update. Just a few doors down, a couple of young students were murdered in their own home. Now, could we say for sure that this killer and the clown were one and the same? No, because according to her, they never actually tracked down who did it. But it is a wee bit of a coincidence. Imagine a real-life killer clown out on the loose, skulking in the shadows. It's the stuff of nightmares. But did it even happen? Well, although 2016 was flooded with similar clownish claims, all thanks to the remake of Stephen King's It, it's safe to say that this one wasn't one of them. Yep, sorry if I kept you awake for months with visions of masked men lurking outside your windows, but at least now you can sleep soundly, knowing I made it all up. John Wayne Gacy aside, acts of violence committed by clowns are actually pretty rare, so if, like me, you're not a fan of a grown-ass man and a big red nose, then hopefully that'll put your mind at ease. For about 3 seconds before we dive into my dark storybook for another twisted tale. So kiddies, it's time to blow out the campfire and zip up those sleeping bags. Welcome to Here She Lies. I call this one the Washington Wendigo. I've never considered myself an adventurous person. The only time I spent in the forest behind my house was when someone's big brother had acquired a couple of light, illegal refreshments. Locked away in my bedroom, eyes fixed on my PlayStation was more my speed, much to my mother's disgust. "Look," she'd screech, "you're gonna end up with square eyes if you don't stop looking at that TV screen." That threat hadn't aged well, and at the ripe old age of 39, I was very much still attached to my gaming system. As anyone who grew up here will know, the weather is mediocre at best, and aside from a couple of good days in the summer, we're pretty much accustomed to the heavy wind and rain. I don't like anything wet and cold. Just give me a heated blanket and a butch onesie and I'm a happy man. My aversion to the chilly conditions is probably the main reason behind my lack of camping experience. My best buddy Jared, on the other hand, he absolutely lives for that shit. As a kid, he'd disappear into the woods for days on end, being at one with nature and all that crap. In fact, he'd even met his now wife Maria on this charity camping weekend, and from then on in, it only got worse. Now, if I sound bitter, it's probably because I am. Since Jared and Maria had gotten together, things had changed. Playing Call of Duty with the boys was no longer a priority anymore, and if I'm being real for a second, I miss my best friend. As of late, there appeared to be something missing from our friendship, an unmistakable chasm that, no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't seem to fill. Jared, who goes by Jay, FYI, had invited me to many of his find yourself camping trips over the years, but never once had I seriously considered attending. However, with our bond slowly floundering, when Maria called to invite me to Jay's big 40th surprise birthday trip in the nearby mountains, for the first time, I actually felt compelled to join in. Lucky for me, my sister and her husband are obnoxiously outdoorsy and offered to lend me all the equipment I might need. Try not to die, loser, Kayla said as I loaded their massive tent into the bed of my truck. At the time, I just flipped the bird and pulled out of their driveway, naively unaware that in just 3 days, I'd be doing just that. Trying not to die. The morning of the surprise was brutal to say the least. I'd been up late the night before packing my stuff, so the 5 a.m. rise was killing me. I grabbed a flask of black coffee before heading out the door. The plan was to meet up at Jay's, do the big reveal, and then carpool with everyone from there. As much as I hated getting up before sunrise, the look on Jay's face as I backed up to the house was worth every bit of my discomfort. He was truly shocked to see me, and I could have sworn that when he yanked me in for a hug, that I heard him let out a little cry. Thankfully, our uncharacteristically emotional moment was interrupted by the arrival of the rest of the party. As they disembarked from their vehicles one by one, I nodded and waved over politely, but there was one face that I couldn't quite place. She was tall, with a deep tanned complexion and curly brown hair that framed her face perfectly. I assumed she was just one of Maria's girlfriends, although something about her was oddly familiar. It wasn't until about 10 seconds in that I realised I was still staring at her, so I averted my gaze towards the door, sure that I'd just labelled myself as Jay's weirdo friend. We all spent the next few minutes catching up and, of course, introductions were made to break the proverbial ice between the different groups. I'd known Jay since kindergarten and we'd somehow managed to stay friends, so it was nice to finally meet those he'd befriended along the way. Once everyone had arrived safe and sound, it was time to figure out who would be going in whose car, etc. I agreed to take Brian, Jay's old college roommate, and just as I was about to offer up my last seat, I saw Maria push the tall girl from before forward, almost knocking her over. "What the hell, Maria?" she gasped before looking sheepishly at the ground. Linking her arm from behind, she giggled and said, "Don't be weird, Maya. This is Luke. Luke, this is Maya, and you'll be going in his truck." I could see what she was up to, but Maya was an absolute 10 out of 10, so I didn't mind one bit. The 2-hour journey went by quicker than expected, probably due to the fact that Maya and I hadn't stopped talking. Turns out she was also a massive video game fan too, and once I got her started, I couldn't shut her up. Poor Brian could hardly get a word in, so he spent the majority of his journey just looking out into the forest. I hadn't dated in such a long time. I mean, I was practically about to join the priesthood, and when a little voice in the back of my head said that there was something between Maya and I just chose to go with it. Could it have all been in my head? 110%, but the possibility was still quite exciting. We pulled up to the campsite at around 9 a.m. and, ever the gentleman, I helped Maya down from the truck and grabbed her rucksack from the back. She gave me this funny look when I gently draped the straps over her shoulders. Being the awkward ass that I am, I quickly shifted my focus to unloading our gear, afraid that she'd spot the red hue that had now taken up residence on my cheeks. Smooth, I thought to myself. Nothing says big sexy man like blushing as if you were a 12-year-old girl. I slumped 3 folded up tens over my shoulder, trying to claw back some of that self-respect I felt I'd just lost. Now, I know I sound like one of those toxic podcast bros, but in my defence, I really like this girl. The next hour and a half was spent setting up our lodgings for the weekend and making sure that we hadn't forgotten any of the essentials before getting the party started. There's nothing worse than being a few undercooked hot dogs in before realising you've left the toilet paper at home. As pre-planned by Maria, Saturday would be spent eating, drinking and sharing our favourite stories about Jay, and on Sunday we'd all head off on a 4-hour hike. It sounded idyllic, or at least that's what I thought. It was nearing 7 p.m. and the sun had descended behind the hills. A few of us had already called it a night, all filled up on cheap food and even cheaper beer. I was the last to go to bed, taking a little detour for a piss before I went. Now I know I said I wasn't an outdoorsman, but there was something so serene about being out in the middle of the woods with nothing but the elements and the crunching of fall leaves to keep me company. My path lit only by the flashlight on my cell phone, I took my time, taking in all of the sights and the sounds. It was then that I heard a noise in the distance that wasn't quite right. At first it sounded like an owl hooting from an overhead branch, but as I got closer and really listened, I noticed that something was off about it. It was sounding less like an owl and more like a human mimicking an owl. The rolling of R's and the flat lifeless tone was a dead giveaway. "Real funny, guys," I yelled into the trees, hoping that whoever was messing with me would get the hint. But as soon as those words had left my mouth, a heavy thud echoed from the dark, and something crunched down onto the twigs below. Nope, not today. I turned a corner and finally saw the flickering campfire up ahead. Half expecting to find the pranksters revelling in their victory, I was surprised to find the place completely deserted. As far as I could tell, everyone was fast asleep. So I surmised that I'd had one too many Budweisers and dipped into my tent for some well-needed rest. "You stay away from him. Whatever the fuck you are, you just stay the hell away." Jay's threatening screams woke me from a deep slumber. I could sense the fear in his voice. I instinctively reached out my hand to unzip the tent, when from behind I heard a terrifying whisper that cut through the chaos outside. "Look, fuck this." I scrambled for my nearest exit, practically crawling on my hands and knees. Sticks and stones tore at the flesh on my shins as I struggled to regain my stability. I could now see Jay's mouth hung open in horror, head peeking out of his tent. I moved to face the same direction in which he was looking, but I saw nothing. Just the woods, my tent, and a regular old tree stump. Maria and I tried talking him down, assuring him that it was probably just a mix of excessive alcohol and a bad nightmare. But Jay didn't want to hear it. He was adamant that what he'd seen was no figment of his imagination. Shamefully, I kept my own experience of disembodied voices to myself, convincing myself that we all just needed a decent night's sleep. The next morning, there was an unnerving atmosphere that hung in the air, one that not even the smell of freshly cooked bacon could mask. Some of us hung back at the camp, whilst the rest of us headed out on a short hike. The surroundings were breathtaking. We walked up a small trail past a jade-green babbling brook. Maya got sluggish at around the 5-mile mark, so I slowed down my pace to keep her company. A couple of times I caught Maria looking back at us, a smug grin etched across her face. I guess she was just happy that her brilliant plan was finally working. We soon reached a fork in the road when Jay declared it was time to turn back. He claimed that he was hungry, but I could hear the unease in his voice when he spoke. He looked rough, as if he'd hardly slept a wink. It freaked me out. It's important to note that Jay wasn't exactly a novice out here. He'd grown up hunting bears and mountain lions with his late father, so the fact that he was wigging out over some faceless shadow was making me nervous. Eager to get some food in our systems, we obeyed and started on our return. The others were still nursing their hangovers when we arrived. I nipped back to my tent to change out of my dirty hiking gear, but as I got close, I was stopped dead in my tracks. Up ahead, there was that same familiar setting, same amber tree line, my sturdy navy blue tent. Only now, the tree stump was totally gone. Now, when I say gone, I don't mean it had been uprooted or anything like that. I mean it had completely vanished, the ground underneath untouched, as if it had never even been there in the first place. I stared straight ahead, recalling the strange events from the night before. Was I imagining things? Spiraling, I called the others over, but to my horror, they were just as dumbfounded as I was. Each of them too remembered the dark, peculiar tree stump that had once sat just a few feet to the left of where I slept. No one could explain its sudden disappearance. I looked right at Jay, who was now perched on a nearby rock, his eyes fixed on the spot where the twisted stump once stood. Unsure as to what my next move should be and keen to steady my nerves, I pulled a beer out from the cooler and took a swig. Jay shot me an angry look, to which I replied, "Listen, we're all tired and half of us are still drunk from the night before. How about we just hunker down for the night and we'll leave first thing tomorrow?" Maria nodded unenthusiastically and Jay's face began to soften. We made some food and one by one slinked off to our tents. I got up at around 5 the next morning, cleaning up discarded bottles and half-empty soda cans. Maya wasn't long behind me as she'd wandered off into the forest to relieve herself just after 6. I didn't like the idea of her going out there on her own, but I wasn't about to follow her like a creep. 5 minutes passed and everyone had started to pack up their things. I guess I wasn't the only one who couldn't wait to get out of here. As I folded my tent into its carrier, a shrill cry ringing from the north side grabbed my attention. I stood up, heart in my throat, ears perked, as I waited for another sound. And that's when I saw her. Maya rushed towards us through the forest, feet pounding on the dirt, sprinting at full speed. "Help! Oh my God, somebody please help me!" Her voice echoed around the camp. I thought she'd lost it, until I realised that she wasn't alone. About 15 yards away, there stood this creature. At first glance, you could be forgiven for mistaking it as a deer, but as it emerged from the shadows, I could now see that it was standing on its hind legs. A hybrid of both beast and man, it stalked through the woods, creeping behind her like a wild animal tracking its next meal. Without thinking, I yelled at Maya to duck as I grabbed my 12 gauge from my tent. I'd brought it along with me out of sheer paranoia, but every single day, I thank God that I did. I took position, unloading 6 shells in the monster's direction. It darted back into the veiled darkness of the forest, but not before emitting a vicious roar. I dropped my weapon and ran to Maya, who was still lying face down in the dirt, shivering. I held her close while everyone watched on in confusion. I guess from where they had been standing on the opposite side of the camp, they hadn't been able to see the thing that Maya was running from. To them, we must have seemed like lunatics. Of course, once the shock wore off, we told them what had happened. Most of them believed us, while others were slightly more sceptical. I didn't care whether they thought it was true or not. I just wanted to get the fuck out of there. So within 10 minutes, my truck was packed and I was ready to leave. Maya insisted she travel back with me. Brian, desperate to avoid being a third wheel again, opted to go with some of Jay's work buddies. For the first 20 to 30 minutes, we didn't speak. It was Maya who finally broke the silence. Look, it wasn't just me, was it? You saw that thing too, right? No, Maya, it wasn't just you. Just rest, I said. We can talk about it later. But before she gave in to a deep sleep, she gently whispered, Look, are you ever gonna ask me out? It was 6 years ago she asked me that question, and now, laying on the sofa next to her, I'm so happy she did. Since that weekend, we've gone on to have 2 beautiful kids and have just bought our forever home 5 minutes from Tacoma, Washington. In the months that followed, I spent many a sleepless night going over mountain legends and Washington folklore online, but it never brought me any concrete answers. I might never really know what happened that weekend, but at least now, Mum and Dad have a scary story to tell the kids. Well, when they're old enough, of course. The end. And that, boys and girls, is why I will never go camping in America. Does it look lovely? Yes. Am I willing to die for a nice view? Absolutely not. Actually, speaking of which, I was on TikTok the other night, despite the fact that I'm about 97, and my For You page was just flooded with loads of videos of horrors from the Appalachian Mountains. And I have a question. How do you guys get anything done when there's literally a forest demon at your back door every 5 minutes? All jokes aside, the internet will never be short of stories involving flesh pedestrians, shapeshifters, and mimics. But is there really a Washington Wendigo? Let me know what you think, either in the comments box below or over on our Instagram page at heresheliespodcast. Now, before you head off to change your pants, it's time for my newest and favouriteest part of the show, Gremlins Gone Wild. Do you have a freaky deaky story you'd like to share with the class? Then feel free to send them over to heresheliespodcast@gmail.com. This week's story is by someone with one of the best usernames I've probably ever come across in my whole life. It's Painfully Aware Gay Man. I got a knock on the door in the middle of the night at a cabin in the woods. A few years ago, I had an extremely stressful week at work, so I decided to book a cabin on Airbnb very last minute for the same night that Friday. Me and the dog packed up and I drove there about an hour and a half away. I stopped on the way and got a bottle of wine in a town about 20 minutes from the cabin. I got to the cabin at around 7:45, just enough light out to start a fire, which I did. The cabin was down this gravel road that was about a 5-minute drive from the main road. There was no cell service near the cabin.
Hell no, to the no, no, no.
The reviews of the place were all great. It had electricity and a clean, updated bathroom. We sat around the fire until about 11:30. I put it out and I went inside with the dog, just putzing about on my phone. The dog keeps becoming alert to noises outside, but I just took it as it was the woods doing their thing.
Bitch, you better be joking.
About 45 minutes into laying in bed, I heard a light knock at the door. My heart dropped into my gut. I didn't answer, and I heard a light knock again about 30 seconds later. Now, I was wondering if there was something wrong with the Airbnb, and because there was no cell service, the owner couldn't get to me. Like, is this place on fire? I don't know. In this kind of scenario, all sorts runs through your mind. The door was solid, but there was a window to the right of it on the porch. I turned the porch light on and peeked my head through the window, and a guy was standing there. It didn't seem scary necessarily. He may have been drunk, but he wasn't like smashing down the door or screaming. I said, "What do you want?" And he motioned his hand towards the door to come into the cabin. And I said, "Why?" With an attitude now, because who the fuck is this? He then says, "For sex."
I wasn't expecting that.
Now, in my mind, I'm like, what? I told him this is highly inappropriate and you need to leave right now. I have a GPS cell phone and I will call the police immediately. Of course, I didn't have a GPS phone, but I've always been a fast thinker. I hoped it would scare him off. He quickly just turned around and left from the porch. The cabin was mostly one open room. I laid back down in the bed, heart pounding. I didn't know if he was going to go get a gun or something to break in with. I lay in bed in fear for about 3 to 4 minutes, honestly just thinking of stuff that I had to use as a weapon. It was COVID times, so I had rubbing alcohol and a lighter right there on my bedside table. My plan was, if he got in somehow, to pretty much light him on fire.
Why? Why did you set me on fire, SpongeBob?
I laid back down in bed, lights off and terrified until the sun came up. He never did come back. I packed up and left as soon as it was bright enough and messaged the Airbnb owner as soon as I got cell service. They said that nothing like that had ever happened before and they even offered to help me file a police report. I didn't, of course, because I live far away and, to be honest, I still think it was just one of those one-off things. Reason 5777 why I will never camp or stay in a cabin in the backwoods of America. It's just not worth my life. Do you know what I'm saying? Anywho, thank you so much for that amazing and wonderful story. I probably won't sleep tonight, but I guess that's on me. But before I say goodnight to you all, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to every one of you that have watched, listened, everything for the last few years. I know we've been on a bit of a roller coaster, okay, I'm well aware, but you have it in writing, in my blood, that I'm here and I'm here to stay. So, to show my appreciation to all you little creeps out there, I have a brand new segment to close out the show, and it's called Spooky Bitch of the Week.
Back off, ya spooky bitch!
This week's shout out goes out to the amazing Brandon, who said, "I'm so glad you're back, but also glad that you took time off to find what content you enjoy making most. Looking forward to seeing the new vibes." Thank you so much. I know you've watched the channel for a while, and yeah, if you want your shout out to be in next week's episode, then leave a little nice comment, you know? Niceness doesn't cost anything, but if you leave the nasty ones, we will block you. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please smash those like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to leave a gorgeous 5-star review because they really help me and the channel. If you're wondering what I got up to in my free time, then please feel free to follow me, not home because that's a crime, over on Instagram and TikTok at heresheliespodcast and at Megan True Stories. I love you all so much, so please remember to stay out the woods, don't talk to strangers, and I'll see you next week. Bye! Mwah! Big kisses.